They showed up at dawn, clipboards in hand, like they owned the sunrise. Gloria Bates in a crisp blazer, a line of neighbors behind her, and a sheriff's cruiser idling like a prop. I remember standing on my own porch, coffee cooling in my palm, and she pointed at the yard like she'd walked out of the map herself. "This isn't your land to do what you want," she said, and that was the first time I realized how fast a quiet life can get loud. "My name is Eli Mercer. That house on the hill belonged to my grandmother before it belonged to me, and before that it belonged to someone who built it with his own 2 hands. It's not a mansion 2 rooms added on, a crooked fence, the kind of porch that remembers every winter, but it's ours. I fixed that porch plank by plank because that's how you honor a place. I didn't expect to be defending it with paper and a stack of county stamps. They called it an HOA issue, but it wasn't. Gloria called it a violation. She called it a danger. She called it everything that made the sheriff's cruiser feel necessary. The notice they tacked to my door had that professional tone, bold headers, dates, the kind of legalese that wants you to back down without looking up. But when I flipped the paper over, there were lines that didn't match the land, coordinates that pulled the boundary like taffy, and a map with red ink drawn over facts like someone was rewriting the truth with a Sharpie. I started slow. I took pictures. I wrote down what her assistant said, because people forget what they said when they think you can't hold them to it. I walked to the county recorder like a man who's trying to learn a language he never planned to speak. Old records smell like dust and time, and when the clerk slid the deed across the counter, there it was, the boundary, the signatures, the stamps, the unvarnished truth. Gloria's map looked pretty hanging on my kitchen table, but it didn't say what she said it did. That's when it got nastier. The notices multiplied like weeds. Someone put up a security sign on my gate that didn't belong to any company I recognized. A neighbor posted a photo of my broken fence on the neighborhood feed with a caption that made it sound like I was hiding something, and a drone started making these rounds over my property like it had nothing better to do. You can dismiss a rumor, but you can't unsee 100 people looking at a drone footage still of your life, framed by someone else's opinion. I met Ruth Anders at the Historical Society. She's small and fierce, with a cardigan that looks like it's seen more county hearings than I have. She pulled out an old plat, yellowed edges and careful handwriting, and she said, "Eli, you've got miles on that line that aren't theirs." Her voice had that satisfying certainty that comes from reading more books than the people making the trouble. When Ruth spoke, the facts lined up the way a set of photographs can line up a memory. Gloria didn't like that. She organized a meeting at the community hall, all leather-bound binders, and a slideshow that made the neighborhood drama look like a corporate launch. I remember the room humming before she spoke, neighbors sipping coffee out of styrofoam cups, and Gloria at the podium with a laser pointer like a baton. Her slides were clean charts, quotes, a map that looked different from the one Ruth had. She stood tall, and she said, "We're doing this for the community." People nodded. That's the dangerous part when you dress power up in neighborly language. I went up to the mic because someone had to. I wasn't polished, but I had paper. I said, "I have the deed. I have the county stamps." Gloria smiled like she had a secret recipe for smiles. "Everyone has documents, Mr. Mercer," she said, and the room leaned in like it loved her voice more than the facts. Then Ruth handed the old plat to the meeting chair. People looked at ink from 100 years ago, and then at Gloria's slide, and that little silence, the one between breaths, started to change people's faces. I didn't want to fight. I wanted my house to be quiet again. But the whole thing began to smell less like neighborhood concern and more like a small war for control. I dug into the pattern. Other people had similar stories. Neighbors whose mailboxes were keyed with notices, whose sheds were photographed at odd hours. There was this sheen of power. Gloria enjoyed calling meetings, making rules, stamping her authority with a neat ink pad. When someone holds the clipboard, people listen, even when the clipboard is wrong. She escalated. Legal letters showed up, formal and stamped, claiming emergency relief, trying to fast-track restrictions that should have been ordinary hearings. I read them under that same kitchen light where I fixed the porch, and I felt something switch. The responsibility shifted from proving my right to exposing a pattern. We hired a local attorney, not some expensive suit from downtown, someone who knew county procedure and how to fold paper into weapons or shields. In courtrooms, the truth needs a calm voice and patience, like fishing, waiting for the bite. The hearing day looked like an ugly documentary. 2 tired people, a man with a blazer, Gloria with her neat hair, my lawyer with a stack of photos. The judge, a woman who had that look of someone who's heard all the neighborhood stories before listened. Gloria's map was glossy and persuasive until my lawyer put the county deed next to it, until Ruth's plat sat on the bench like a stubborn relic, until the drone footage was shown with timestamps that contradicted the HOA's timeline. The courtroom is a place where small details are giant things. A single stamp can weigh more than 100 speeches. There was a moment when Gloria leaned over and hissed, "You think you can humiliate me in front of these people?" I remember it like a knife, not because she raised her voice, but because she assumed shame would fold me. I answered before thinking, "I think I can show what happened." It wasn't eloquent, but it was true, and truth has this funny habit of being louder than a polished line when it's laid out plain. The judge denied the emergency relief. That's the legal shorthand for "not today." It didn't fix everything, but it did a thing that mattered. It made the file say what it really was: an overreach aimed at a person who had a history of money and permits and stamps stacked in a neat pile. The county opened an inquiry into the HOA's practices, and Gloria's phone started to ring with investigators rather than neighbors. Power is loud until someone else calls the tune. Afterwards, we cleaned up the lawn. I painted the fence because the paint felt like a small victory, like saying you're not going to hide while people decide your life for you. Gloria moved on to other projects. People in small towns always move their energy somewhere, but the smell of it lingered, like burned coffee. Some neighbors apologized quietly, others didn't speak at all. The community garden went in where the old vacant lot used to be, the kind of compromise that feels both like a peace treaty and a bandage. I think what I remember most is simple. Mornings on that porch with the sun warming the boards, I refinished myself. There's a comfort to the sound of a creek that you can name. There's also a new rhythm in me, a patience for legal forms, a mistrust of neat smiles, and an appreciation for people like Ruth who carry old maps like armor. We won in a way that doesn't make for fireworks. We won by showing up with the right papers, by telling a story with dates and stamps and witnesses who remembered when things were less dramatic. If there's a lesson here, it's not a neat moral you can frame for a bumper sticker. It's that small things are important, that the right to your own porch is something you defend with ordinary tools, receipts, deeds, neighbors who remember, and that communities can be swayed by charisma, but they can also be steadied by truth. You don't have to be noisy to be right, but you do have to be ready. So I'll leave you with this. Look at your own porch. Think about what you'd stand for if someone arrived at dawn with a clipboard. Tell me what you would do. Would you fight with stamps and deeds, or would you step back and trust the person with the loud voice? Drop a comment, tell a story, argue aside. Share this if it makes you think about how power shows up in little places. And if you've been through something like this, say it. People need to know they're not alone.